Now back to our coverage of the presidential race. Our latest CBS Battleground tracker shows enthusiasm over the national ticket growing among registered voters as the campaign gathers momentum since selecting Kamala Harris as VP. The tracker also shows rising support among voters who describe themselves as somewhat liberal. Biden also leads President Trump among suburban women, a group the president is targeting, and has overwhelming support from women of color. Ian Sams is joining us to speak about this and more. He is the former press secretary for Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. Good to see you, Ian.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So, we've been talking about the last couple of days about the thinking that went into Vice President Biden in making the selection of Senator Harris as his pick. What do you think made her the most attractive pick for Vice President Biden? Because every woman on that stage was qualified to be vice president and even president of the United States.
Absolutely. I think that when you go through the vetting process to pick a running mate, you really look at a few key things when making the final decision. I think first, Vice President Biden, I think, wanted somebody, to your point in the introduction here, who was ready to govern on day one. You can say that's true of all the other finalists as well, but there's no denying that Senator Harris, who is the junior senator from the largest state in the country, who was a twice elected statewide official, the Attorney General of California, which is the second largest Justice Department in America behind the federal Justice Department, who really has been in public life, ran for president herself, has been through the scrutiny and vetting of a national campaign. There's really no denying that she's ready to step into the role on day one if necessary. I think second, I think he wanted to, and he made this commitment during the primary campaign, that he wanted to pick someone who was history making. And I think obviously by saying he was going to pick a woman was audacious enough in itself, but to take somebody who has the life story of Senator Harris, who is the child of immigrants, who grew up in this country as a proud Black woman, an HBCU graduate, someone who really was the first in all the offices that she ran for and was elected to, I think sends a really big signal to the kind of country and the kind of government that Joe Biden wants to run if he gets elected president. That's really reflective and representative of communities who I think are too often left out and left behind. He wanted to make a real point that that was going to be a priority for him in his administration by making this selection.
The other thing that I think is sort of interesting to me is, as you well know, it doesn't appear to me that Senator Harris is a shrinking violet. In other words, she is ready, as we've seen when she is questioning folks like the Attorney General, for example, in a committee hearing, to take you to the woodshed if there's something that she disagrees with or if there's a point that she's trying to make. Do you think that dynamic will continue to exist even when she is vice president, should Biden be elected? Because, and I wonder, knowing what you know about her and what you know about Joe Biden, is that something that he thought about, that she, is willing to challenge somebody if she thinks that there's something that she doesn't agree with or something that she thinks is wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there was an interview that just came out late last night, the first joint interview between the two of them in People magazine. And I think they asked explicitly, is she going to be a vice president who's going to tell you when she thinks she's wrong? And Biden said, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why I picked her. I think that it's true that she's not a shrinking violet. I think that she is someone who asks a lot of questions, who really wants to understand the full scope of an issue before making a decision. I think that she's someone who's, as you said, not afraid to speak up and speak out when she sees something is wrong. I think that even Vice President Biden knows that. And I think that that's one of the reasons why he picked her. I think in terms of Vice President Biden's selection of someone who he doesn't always agree with on something and basically is open to having her speak in disagreement when they disagree, if they were to win and they were in the Oval Office together, I think it's such a contrast with Donald Trump. I mean, you think about President Trump, whose 4 years in office have really been marked by loyalty pledges and demands that you are obsequious to him in every whim that he has. He demands that people, pledge first loyalty to him more than the country. And so I think that when Joe Biden's willing to step up and say, I'm willing to pick a former rival, someone who was critical of me at times, someone who I disagree with at times, someone who I want to tell me when I'm wrong or when I'm missing something, is a really good testament to his character and the kind of president that he would be, seeking counsel from a broader array of people than just sycophants and loyalists like this president has done. And so my experience with Senator Harris is she's going to tell it like it is every single time. I mean, you're never going to get away with having a bad position because the prosecutor in her is going to come out and it's going to say, why are you saying that? Why do you believe that? I don't necessarily think that's right. I think that that's a testament of her strength as a leader. And I think as a running mate to Vice President Biden, that she's someone who's going to, always speak her mind and speak out if she sees what you're doing and what you're saying is wrong.
Speaking of President Trump, after Senator Harris joined the Democratic presidential ticket, here's what President Trump tweeted. This is a quote here. "The suburban housewife will be voting for me. They want safety and are thrilled that I ended the long-running program where low-income housing would invade their neighborhood. Biden would reinstall it in a bigger form with Cory Booker in charge." I don't know what the Cory Booker reference is to. I don't know what that means. Also, there are certainly moms and wives who perhaps choose to stay at home, but the term suburban housewife is sort of, it just sort of boggles the mind. I guess the question is, how does Senator Harris help Vice President Biden appeal to suburban voters and suburban women?
Well, I think, first of all, that's just plain old sexism and racism by Donald Trump. Nothing new. It's not that hard to explain. It's not that hard to understand. He's been doing it for most of his adult life and career, even before he got into politics. And so he's relying on those same tactics that he thinks got him to where he was now. And he's just disrespecting the fact that Americans are pretty sick and tired of it. Look, I think that suburbanites often in politics are euphemistic. I think that when you really look at the suburban communities that exist across this country right now, and really the reason that suburban communities have been trending blue over the last 3 or 4 years especially, is because they're increasingly diversified. I mean, we have large pockets of Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinos who are moving to suburban communities and counties across this country to build a better life for themselves and their families. And in addition to, I think, what Donald Trump likes to think of as the white suburban, archetype of Leave It to Beaver from 1950, that's just not reflective of what suburban communities are anymore. And so I think it's just a huge disconnect from the reality of Americans' lived experiences that Donald Trump, sits in his gold lofty tower and tweets things like suburban housewives, and he thinks that it means something that's just not reflective of the country anymore. And I think that what Vice President Biden, and we saw this in the strength of his primary campaign and where his pockets of support were when he won the nomination, but also Senator Harris, where her strong appeal lies, is among communities of color, among women, among college-educated people who live in suburban communities, among younger people. These are all people who, in the modern era, have overpopulated suburban communities in this country and are, living a new American life there. And so I think that this ticket, Biden and Harris, really do reflect and speak to the current lived experiences of suburban people much more than Donald Trump, who I think is stuck in the 1950s and doesn't really understand the evolution and change that's happened in America over the last few years.
And Ian, I guess, it's sort of interesting to me, too, that, we can talk about all that stuff, and it's certainly important, but, we still live in the United States of America where there are sometimes still people who, whether it's the president of the United States or others, people who are Democrats, who still have a certain mindset when it comes to women. And I know that you're aware that apparently during the vetting process, reportedly, some critics said that Kamala Harris was, quote, too ambitious. And to me, I would take that as a strength. If you're a person, if you're a man or a woman, that you want that as a compliment as opposed to something that, should be looked down upon. But, that's how sometimes men specifically, let's just call it for what it is, think about women. No one says that a guy is too ambitious. When they see a guy, they say, who's ambitious, say, what a go-getter. He's a boss. He's running things. And when a woman is too ambitious, hey, tone it down, tone it down. So I wonder, she's probably heard that her entire life. And how does she deal with hearing that still in 2020, whether it comes from a Republican or a Democrat?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty fascinating glimpse into how sexism still pervades so much of our politics and our culture today. I mean, you think back to name a vice presidential running mate who isn't ambitious. I mean, you think about Vice President Biden when he was President Obama's running mate. He had run for president twice before. When you think of Dick Cheney, who was George Bush's running mate and vice president. He had been involved in public life since the 1960s and was a Secretary of Defense and a White House Chief of Staff and led the actual vetting process himself and then chose himself to be the running mate. That's about as ambitious as it gets. I think that this is not just the modern era. It goes back forever that anybody who is qualified and capable to be vice president probably also thinks that they're qualified and capable to be president. It's kind of part of the job. And so for Senator Harris to sort of embrace that, which she did, I think is bold. And it says the kind of person that she is. She's always been a sort of unafraid to break barriers. I think she's often said on the trail, when you break barriers and break glass ceilings, you're going to get cut and it hurts. And that's just something that she's not afraid of. I think the other thing that she really understands really uniquely and keenly and has the self-awareness of as a public official and candidate is that she is the first in a lot of ways, like herself, to run for these high offices and to be in these positions. And so she tells herself, I have to set an example for all the people who are going to come behind me and who are going to try to follow in my footsteps. And that's something that's a burden that she carries, but it's also, I think, a source of pride for her. And when you have these attacks that, oh, you're too ambitious, to be a loyal running mate, I think that she's willing to step up and say, don't say that. There are millions of young girls across this country who need to be told to follow their ambitions and who need to see ambition and ambitiousness as an element of success for themselves in their future. And so, that's not something that we should shy away of as women leaders. And, it was made me proud to see her say that. And I think, it's something that's true of, I think, women who are seeking high office across this country. And we saw in 2018, the record-breaking number of women who got elected to Congress. When women embrace their ambitiousness and run and don't let these sexist stereotypes hold them back, I think the voters respect that. And voters believe that it is time to make that sort of history. And so, for Kamala to sort of take that on her shoulders and take it on directly head on, it really speaks to her boldness and audacity as a candidate, but also I think her character as a leader and understanding that Americans are going to follow.
It's such a fascinating point, Ian. And as I was listening to you, my mind went back to other women who have pushed beyond some of those boundaries. And of course, we think of Hillary Clinton, and regardless of how you may feel about her politics, I do recall that when she was First Lady, you remember? I don't know, you might be too young to remember this, but there was that moment when I believe, and I'm stretching my own memory here, but she had that comment where she said, I'm not going to be Tammy Wynette, stand by your man type of First Lady, right? This is when Bill Clinton was running for president, and the whole world lost its mind. Oh my, how could she say that? What's wrong with her? And fast forward when she's running for president the first time around, I recall that she was being criticized for much the same things that Kamala Harris is being, the comments that were made about Kamala Harris. About being too ambitious, about being too pushy. And then there was that moment in the '08 race where she had a moment where she sort of got misty-eyed over something. Yep. And the next day you saw all the press reports, oh, she's softened, and all of a sudden people seem to be drawn to that. It's just so hard for women to sort of figure out how people are going to take whatever they do. They're not, men are not held to the same standards as sometimes women are.
Absolutely not. And I think it's interesting. I think you brought up something that's important to think about when you think about women who are pursuing national office and higher office. For 25 years, basically, Hillary Clinton's been the only standard. And that's really an unfair thing for not only her, that, her actions are magnified and amplified tenfold. And if, she gets twisted around in the wind, then, that's for some reason the only metric that anyone has to judge women who are running for high office. But I also think that what's been so fascinating and really, hope-inducing over the last 3 or 4 years is the more women step up and run for a higher office themselves, whether it's at the local level, state level, congressional level, national level, like we saw in this presidential primary with a number of amazing female senators and leaders who are running. The more options of emulation that little girls and people across this country have to see themselves in their leaders. And so I think, one of the things that's hard for press and pundits and other people to sort of figure out is you like to have a measuring stick. You like to be able to say, I can reference something else from the past to help me understand the present. And what's really true of people like Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren or Hillary Clinton is that there are very few others to measure against. And so you're kind of carrying this burden and this experience on your own as a trailblazer and sort of ceiling breaker. And so, I think that what we've seen over the last couple of years is, and especially I think with the selection of Senator Harris as the running mate for Vice President Biden, is there are different ways and different paths to be successful as a woman in politics, and that women should lean into themselves and follow their own arrow and follow their own ambition. Yes, in order to find their own way in national politics and in running for office themselves. And so I think that the more people step up to run, the more we're going to have other barometers from which to measure female candidates for office. And so, I think that's probably one of the legacies of the 2020 Democratic primary is, we had not just one woman who decided to get in the field, which has been the case, I think, over the last 20 years or so. You may have one female candidate who runs, but when you have 6 or 7 candidates who are in a primary who are running and getting the national spotlight, it really opens a lot of doors for people and allows people to see, themselves reflected in their candidates. It's not going to change everything overnight. We're still going to have these sort of sexist double standards, and I think that they're definitely going to come to a fore in this race with Senator Harris being on the ticket. But I think that the public and supporters are more armed to push back on these sexist sort of narratives and tropes than they've ever been in the past, because we're seeing more and more opportunities for advancement in women in the country.
Ian Sams, you are the former press secretary for Senator Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. So great talking to you, man. I could clearly keep talking to you for another 20 minutes, but my producers are telling me to wrap it up. I appreciate your time. It's really, really, interesting and enlightening. I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Well, tonight, Senator Harris will make the case for electing Joe Biden in her speech. Day 3 of our DNC coverage continues throughout the day and kicks into high gear, starting with Red and Blue at 5 p.m. right here on CBSN.